Can we use this mic?
Okay, go use it.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى من فطور ثم ارجع البصر كرتين ينقلب إليك البصر خاسعا وهو حسير. ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير. وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير. إذا علقوا فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير. وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير. فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير. إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. وأسروا قولكم أو اجهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور. ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير. هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور. أأمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور. أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاسبا فستعلمون كيف نذير. ولقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير. أولم يروا إلى الطير فوقهم صافات ويقبضن ما يمسكهن إلا الرحمن إنه بكل شيء بصير. أمن هذا الذي هو جند لكم ينصركم من دون الرحمن إن الكافرون إلا في غرور. أمن هذا الذي يرزقكم إن أمسك رزقه بل لجوا في عتو ونفور. أفمن يمشي مكبا على وجهه أهدى أمن يمشي سويا على صراط مستقيم قل هو الذي أنشأكم وجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة قليلا ما تشكرون قل هو الذي ذرأكم في الأرض وإليه تحشرون ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين قل إنما العلم عند الله وإنما أنا نذير مبين فلما رأوه زلفة سيئت وجوه الذين كفروا وقيل هذا الذي كنتم به تدعون قل أرأيتم إن أهلكني الله ومن معي أو رحمنا فمن يجير الكافرين من عذاب أليم قل هو الرحمن آمنا به وعليه توكلنا فستعلمون من هو في ضلال مبين قل أرأيتم إن أصبح ماؤكم غورا فمن يأتيكم بماء معين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن عليًا حجة الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. حي على السلام. حي على السلام. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
أحسنت. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. صلاة المغرب. إن الصلاة والنسك يا محسن قد أتاك المسيح أنت المسيح. استغفر الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما.
صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ذلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل يا منعم يا مفضل، يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله، أشهد أن عليا ولي الله، أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. صلاة العشاء إن الصلاة ونصلي. استغفر الله يا محسن قد أتاك. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد. ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إنه ليس الموت رزقي وإنما أطلب بخطرة تختل على قلبي فأجل بطلب البلدان فأنا فيما طالب الخيران لا أدري في سهل هو أم في جبل أم في أرض أم في سماء أم في بر أم في بحر ولا يدي من ومن قبل من وقد علمت أن علمه عندك وأسبابه بيدك وأنت الذي تقسم بلطفك وتسببه برحمتك. اللهم فصل على محمد وآله وأجل يا رب لي واسعا ومطلبه سهلا ومأخذه قريبا ولا تعنني بطلب ما تقدر لي فيه رزقا وإنك غني والعذاب وأنا فقير إلى رحمتك. فصل على محمد وآله واجد على عبدك بفضلك إنك ذو فضل عظيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز دلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل يا منعم يا مفضل يا لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
صلی اللہ علیہ محمد و آل محمد. زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں، نہ رکھ اب چادر بازوؤں پہ، تو نیلے داغ چھپا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. تیرے نانا کا یہ روضہ ہے، کوئی کوفہ شام کی راہ نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. جو چادر اجلی تھی تیری، رنگ اس کا کیسے لال ہوا، جو چادر اجلی تھی تیری، رنگ اس کا کیسے لال ہوا، اب سر پہ تیرے اے شہزادی، اب سر پہ تیرے اے شہزادی، وہ کیوں موجود ردا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. تیرے نانا کا یہ روضہ ہے، کوئی کوفہ شام کی راہ نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. 18 جو تیرے بھائی تھے، کس بات پہ تجھ سے روٹھ گئے، 18 جو تیرے بھائی تھے، کس بات پہ تجھ سے روٹھ گئے، دو شہزادے کیوں ساتھ نہیں، دو شہزادے کیوں ساتھ نہیں، کیوں ساتھ عباس تیرا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. نہ رکھ اب چادر بازوؤں پہ، تو نیلے داغ چھپا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. یہ کون جوان ہے ساتھ تیرے، ہے کپڑے جس کے خون سے بھرے، یہ کون جوان ہے ساتھ تیرے، ہے کپڑے جس کے خون سے بھرے، کن زخموں سے یہ چور ہوا، کن زخموں سے یہ چور ہوا، آنکھوں سے بھی خون رکتا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں. تیرے نانا کا یہ روزہ ہے، کوئی کوفہ شام کی راہ نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ کس حال میں کربل سے آئی اے زینب اپنے شہر میں تو، کس حال میں کربل سے آئی اے زینب اپنے شہر میں تو، اب اس کے سوا افسوس ہو کیا، اب اس کے سوا افسوس ہو کیا، پہچان سکی صغرا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ تیرے نانا کا یہ روزہ ہے، کوئی کوفہ شام کی راہ نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ وہ بچی جس کو سینے پہ شبیر سلایا کرتے تھے، وہ بچی جس کو سینے پہ شبیر سلایا کرتے تھے، میری آنکھیں ڈھونڈ کے ہار گئی، میری آنکھیں ڈھونڈ کے ہار گئی، کہیں ملتا اس کا پتہ نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ نہ رکھ اب چادر بازوں پہ، تو نیلے داغ چھپا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ اور ایک غنچہ دہن معصوم بھی تھا، ایک غنچہ دہن معصوم بھی تھا، نام اس کا اصغر رکھا تھا، کیوں خالی گود رباب کی ہے، کیوں خالی گود رباب کی ہے، اسباب میں کیوں جھولا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ نہ رکھ اب چادر بازوں پہ، تو نیلے داغ چھپا نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ تیرے نانا کا یہ روزہ ہے، کوئی کوفہ شام کی راہ نہیں، زہرا کی جہاں شرما نہیں۔ صلی اللہ علی محمد و آل محمد۔ سورۃ المبارکۃ الفاتحہ۔
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani, respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Surah Fatiha is requested for the Salih Sawab of Marhumin listed on the screen and for all Marhumin. Al-Fatiha. Yaman Ujibu is requested for the names listed on the screen and for all those in here and elsewhere. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ 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 أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ يَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ. Ladies Majlis, tomorrow, Tuesday, September 3rd, the ladies will commemorate the Shahadat of Imam Ridha alayhi salam at 10:30 a.m. The Majlis will take place in the Gents main hall and will be recited by Zakra Sabah Bimani. For those who wish to contribute towards the Tabarruk and Hadiyah, please contact Sister Rafia Nathani at 407-921-7454. Muharram Safar Fund. As the month of Safar draws to an end, we are deeply grateful for everyone's generous support. Alhamdulillah, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessings and your help, we've reached our goal of raising $88,800 towards the Muharram Safar programs. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, salawat. Your contributions and prayers have been invaluable towards us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward all of you abundantly in this life and the hereafter, inshaAllah. At this time, I'd like to call Dr. Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani to recite Janazah Majlis with a loud salawat wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحن نقص عليك أحسن القصص صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Florida, across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what are the cycles and the phases of history? When we come to looking at these different cycles and phases of history, there are patterns that are taught within the Quran. You'll notice this within other holy books, such as the Bible, such as the Torah. And of course, you'll find it in the broad spectrum of history that there are certain cycles that repeat, certain patterns that repeat, certain phases that repeat. For example, if you go to the works of Ibn Khaldun, who marked one of the first works in history or historiography, as well as sociology, he said that there are different phases that you'll find in the history of civilizations. When he looked at different civilizations, he found that, for example, there's first the growth phase or the expansion phase. Then there's the one where you establish yourself. Then there is the phase where eventually decadence or luxury fills in and seeps in. And eventually there comes a time in an era where eventually the decline and downfall emerges. Similarly, you'll find in the 18th century, 19th century, and 20th century, there were historians who said that just like human beings are organisms, or animals are organisms, or bacteria or living organisms, or viruses maybe even, human beings are like this, so too are empires like this. The same way that a human being is born, they grow as a child, they mature, they get to the peak of their maturity, and eventually they begin to decline as they begin to become older, and eventually they pass away. So too do empires as well. And so when it comes to this, looking at this era and this phase of what the Quran teaches us and the life and times of the Imams, we're able to get a perspective of the different phases of civilization and society, how the Imams did their role in those phases of society, and how they helped to reconcile some of the difficulties that we have today and even may have in the future. So tonight, inshallah, in the brief moments that we have together, I want to look at the life of our beloved 8th Imam, who we are here to commemorate, in terms of understanding how was he dealing with the difficulties of his time. What were those difficulties and what lessons do they teach us about our time? How is it that there may have been corruption politically at that time, and there may have been a very good image scientifically, technologically, and progress-wise in his time, but the politics of that time may reflect the politics of today very closely, and how we can learn lessons from that Imam and his time. The next element which I want to look at is, what's the relationship between Imam Ar-Ridha and Surah Yusuf? The ayah that I recited from the beginning, in the beginning, is the 3rd verse of Surah Yusuf. What does this have to do with the 8th Imam? And finally, how is it that this Imam reconciles and brings together and harmonizes revelation and reason, or reason and revelation? How does he bring them together in a way that the world had not seen before, to the extent and the point that amongst all of the Ahlul Bayt, he was known as Alim Ali Muhammad? What's the legacy of this Imam? And how does he show us compassion through this merger and this reconciliation between reason and revelation? Not only compassion to other human beings, not only compassion to other creations, to animals, to the existence that Allah creates and beyond. And of course, it being the night of the commemoration of the martyrdom of the 8th Imam, we will also reflect on the tragedy of the Imam, to connect our hearts to his spiritual proximity, so that ultimately we can get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are here in Florida, across the globe, send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, if you read the Quran, Allah makes it clear in certain instances that there is a progression in society, and a progression often leads to complexity in society. Example, Allah in the Quran, if you look at the chapters of the Quran and the ayat of the Quran, they are broadly divided into 2 categories, broadly, from 2 periods, the Meccan period and the Madani period. The Meccan period is, of course, prior to the migration towards Medina, and the Madani period is after post-migration. And in that you'll find that when it comes to the ayat which are Mecki, that is earlier in the first 13 years of the prophetic message, you'll find that those are more focused on believe. Say La ilaha illallah, Qulu La ilaha illallah. Believe that there's one God, believe that Muhammad is the final messenger, belief. It's not focused as much on amal, although there's elements of it. But good deeds, for example. But then whenever you see an ayah in the Quran that says, for example, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe, because the people who are being addressed in the ayat that are predominantly Makki are not always Muslims. Allah is referring to the opposition. For example, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. Allah is talking to the opposition at times. So he's talking to people who are not believing many times in the Makki chapters, in the Makki verses. But when it comes to Medina, Allah is often referring to the believers. And Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. But there's more complexity here. In the phases of Mecca, you will find that there were two broad categories of people. There were the disbelievers and the believers. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addressed accordingly. But when you came to Medina, there was more complexity added. And you'll see this in the ayat which are Madani. You will notice that there are believers, disbelievers, and there are another category called munafiqeen, hypocrites. And that's complexity added because Allah even identifies, if you read some of the verses that are Madani, that there are people who mix truth and falsehood in a way that you would think that they're on the right path, but their niyyah, their intent, and their mixing is not of a good goal. So too similar was the era of the time of our 8th Imam, where there was a height of munafiqat in some sense. That is, the people were saying La ilaha illallah, they were saying Muhammad Rasulullah, but behind the scenes, the dynamics, none of their actions actually showed a conviction towards La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and that is the oneness of Allah and the actions and the life of Rasulullah. So it was a fasad in some sense. Keep this number one point in mind. Number two, Allah gives us examples in the Quran of civilizations that came before. A question for you and I to reflect on, is it possible that there may have been civilizations, people who came before us, who were more sophisticated than us, more advanced than us? Not just 100 years ago, maybe 1,000 years ago, maybe 2,000 years ago? I ask you a question. Please answer me if you know the answer. I'm still looking for the answer. Do you know how the pyramids were made? How were the pyramids of Gaza made? How were the pyramids in Egypt made? Does anyone know? We still haven't figured it out. The complexity therein is something that we are still baffled. There's many theories, but if you look at the size of the rocks, if you look at the size of the lime, if you look at the size of these stones and you look at all the dynamics of physics, we still don't know how they did it. Despite AI even, despite all the progress that we've made in our society today, we still don't know how they did that. No. And so what that means is, this is one simple example in front of your eyes and my eyes of we don't have it all figured out, number one. That doesn't mean that, we stopped exploring. We still need to explore. But Allah gives an example in the Quran of the likes of the people of Ad and Thamud. And Allah tells us, for example, these people, based on how Allah describes them in the Quran, they seem to be very advanced scientifically and technologically, although they lived very long ago. Like their towers and their buildings, Allah describes them, it's as if we don't even have things like this around today. Burj this and Burj that aside, those didn't even hold a candle to what they had built. But they were devastated in a moment. Why am I saying this to you? This is also a secondary point that's very important to consider when we look at the life and times of our 8th Imam. There was tremendous scientific progress going on. There's some tremendous engineering, architectural, and other progress. But at the same time, why is revelation so important? Why is ethics so important? Why is principle so important? It's because of these reasons that we'll try to outline. So it's possible for a civilization to be very technologically, scientifically, and engineeringly advanced, but its moral compass may be out of sync. It's possible. It's happened before, it's happening right now. So now this is the second element. The third element of the life of this Imam, coming to his life, and there's many things to shed on, just a glance of it. And one of the great works on this is a book called Ayun Ikhbar Ar-Ridha, which is a very famous work on the life and times of our 8th Imam, if someone wants to explore more. But this Imam gives us valuable lessons. One is his compassion. When I talk about him being the harmonizer between revelation and reason, this was an age of reason. This was a time of reason where the Imam is living. During the Harun Abbasi time, the likes of Ma'mun al-Abbasi and the Abbasids, recall that the Abbasids are from the line of they are descendants of the Prophet's uncle Abbas. The Prophet had an uncle by the name of Abbas. His grandson's grandson is the one who established the foundation of the Abbasid regime. Now, when the Abbasids came to power, remember they toppled the Umayyads. When they toppled the Umayyads were openly, oftentimes, against the principles of Islam, especially in the later phases, but even earlier. The Abbasids came to power saying that we're going to give the power back to the Ahlul Bayt. It was a good slogan. People bought into it. I'm telling you this as election season's around the corner. This narrative of saying whatever needs to be said to get elected is not new. It's been going on for a long time. The same thing happened with the Abbasids. They said whatever needed to be said, and they were excellent campaign men. And so they campaigned like the best of them. And when they campaigned like the best of them, they eventually won the support of the people. When they won the support of the people, eventually they completely backed away from what they had said that they would do. They stayed in power themselves. Another lesson for the modern era that you find from the life of this Imam. The next element that you find is eventually when this happens and this emerges, you'll find that these Abbasids who are from this line, they also went through different phases. And this is important when I talked about the early phases of what happens in civilizations. This also happens in business. For those of you who are in business, it's a very well-known saying in America, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations. Meaning the first generation, this happened in the early phases of America. The people who came to America 300 years ago, 200 years ago, their first generation, I don't know if you know this, but one of the commonalities amongst the founding fathers and the signatories of the Declaration of Independence, one of the things that was common amongst all of them was they were all entrepreneurs. And one of the things that America was really a catalyst for was entrepreneurship. And so the old saying was when people came to America, the first generation built up as entrepreneurs and businessmen and women. And eventually what happened was they gave these businesses to their children, the second generation. And what happened was the second generation saw the struggles of their parents, and they saw what their parents did coming to a new world, a new land, building up their business, and they saw those struggles and they took the businesses that their parents had built up and they built them up bigger. But then along came the third generation. The third generation came and they did not see any of the initial struggles of the first generation. They saw the development of the second generation, and they eventually inherited all the funds from the second generation, and they squandered the money. And this was a pattern that you could say was like clockwork in America. Shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations. The idea being that you'll go reset right back to where you started in 3 generations. Why? Because the difficulties, this is going on in our communities today as well, right? Across the globe, in Canada, America, and UK, people worked really hard to establish the first Imam Bargahs, Husainiyas, Masjid in the 50s, in the 60s. And there was a generation that came after that who struggled tremendously. And they saw those struggles and they built it up bigger. And now you're seeing these amazing Imam Bargahs, Husainiyas everywhere. But there's a new generation who didn't see those initial struggles. I mean, those parents who are working sometimes 2 jobs and racing between majalis in Muharram and Safar to make ends, like to try to get their kids to the majalis, for example. And so these are paradigms that if you don't learn from these patterns of history, they're bound to repeat themselves. And so sometimes you have a niyyah and you have an intent, but you need to validate and verify whether that will actually come true. Now, keeping all this aside, when you come to the life of Imam Ar-Ridha, Imam Ar-Ridha, amongst all of this, was also known as Ar-Ra'uf. One of the titles of this Imam is Ar-Ra'uf. You'll know that amongst the names of Allah is also Ra'uf. Of course, the level of Ra'uf is higher of Allah, it's the highest. The Imams, they reflect a slice of Allah's Ra'uf. Now, Ra'uf is something which also means mercy. And it comes from Rafata. Mercy, but a deeper lens. There's something, I mentioned this in New York, and I'll remind you here as well, it might benefit. Some languages have something called emotional resonance. All languages have this. Some languages have more than others. So for example, I always used to wonder, when I listen to a Masaib, for example, or Gham Bayan in Urdu, why does it impact me more than I would read it in English, or for example, or hear it in English? Because in some languages, there's something called emotional resonance. If you go to Columbia University or some of the top universities in America that study linguistics, language, and the likes, you'll find that they'll say that English is amongst the Germanic languages. English and German, for example, are considered Germanic languages. They're known to be straight to the point. Other languages, in the Latin language of families, such as French and Italian, are known to be much more poetic. Much more poetic than what? Much more poetic than English and German. Then comes other languages such as Arabic and Farsi, which are known to be very poetic languages. Urdu inherits from those two traditions predominantly amongst others. So there are words that are there. For example, if I tell you a word in Urdu, for example, muhabbat, you must have heard of it, love. But there's another word that you can go for deeper called ulfat. Have you heard of ulfat? Ulfat's a deeper type of more nuanced love. So when it comes to Ra'uf, Ra'uf is a type of mercy that inculcates tenderness within it. Sort of like a maternal love. You know, the love of a mother and how considerate a mother is for her child. Similarly, it's like this. That's the next point. the aspect of the Imam's mercy is such that it gives us pause to reflect, that it doesn't just extend to human beings, it extends to beyond that. Allow me to explain. There was a person by the name of Al-Junaidi. Al-Junaidi was basically a foot soldier for the Abbasids, especially for the likes of Harun and the likes. And in this environment, what ends up happening is he is hired in order to traumatize, harass, and bother Imam Ar-Ridha and his family. When he's hired to do this, he would do whatever he could to trouble the Imam. When he would do whatever he could to trouble the Imam, eventually what happened as a result of that is that one day he comes to the house of the Imam to traumatize him and his family and to harass him. Now remember, the Imam is spending a part of his time in Hijaz, in Makkah, Medina, and then he eventually has to migrate to Marv, into Tehran in Iran, modern day, this region, right, of the likes. And so when he's moving here to Iran, before that he's in Medina. And at that point, when this individual comes to him, and before he gets to Mashhad, he comes to him in Medina, and the Imam knows that he's going to traumatize him, and he tried to scare the family. And he says, look, if you need to traumatize us and you've been paid to do this, look, I'll save you the trouble. I'll go and get whatever we have from the house and I'll bring it and I'll hand it over to you. Just don't try to terrorize the women and children and the family. Eventually, he said, oh, it saves me trouble. I still get to do what I need to do. I get what I need to get. I go back and I get my reward. I'm happy. He said, no problem. And he would do this time and time again. Anyways, one day, many years later, when the tides shifted, and people should be aware of this pattern of history as well, that the tides always shift. That is, eventually you'll know that there was Harun al-Abbasi who was in power, then he has his two sons, Ma'mun and Amin. Ma'mun and Amin, they go to fight one another, right? Amin is someone who is known as, for example, a person who is totally engrossed with the world's, glitz and glamour, and his brother is more shrewd of a politician. Example. Harun says, this is a narration during the time of Harun. Harun is sitting in his kingdom or in his room, in his chamber, and he is within one of the people he would spend the nights with. And so he said, I'm going to show you something. So he said, he called his son in the middle of the night, and he said, I'm granting you 3 wishes of whatever you want. So his first son, Amin, comes, and Amin says, oh, you have this property, I want this property. You have this chambermaid, I want that chambermaid. You want this, you have this thing, I want that. So he said, okay, done, all 3 done. So when he left, he then called his other son, Ma'mun. He said, Ma'mun, what do you want? I'm going to grant you, today's your lucky day. 3 wishes, I'm here to grant all your wishes. He said, what do you want? He says, number 1, I want you to increase the pay of all the soldiers in the kingdom. And tell them that Ma'mun said to do this. Okay? I want you to reduce people's taxes. Tell them Ma'mun said to do this. What? Okay. And tell them there's these benefits from the Baytul Mal, the public treasury. Tell them Ma'mun said to do this. Ma'mun says this to Harun. Harun says, very well, done. He went away. He says, did you notice what the difference was between these two? Amin was me, I want this for myself. Ma'mun just won the favor of the soldiers, of the people, and also he said on top of that, release the prisoners of war. So he won public favor amongst the people. He's a shrewd politician. So anyways, why did I say this? I said this because when Ma'mun came to power, he slaughtered his brother Amin to the extent, this is gruesome, but this is the history of the world, it's been gruesome historically. He put his brother's head at the entrance of the city, and you had to step over his brother's head to enter the city. This was the dynamic. Why am I telling you this? The reason I'm telling you this same Junaidi who used to harass Imam Ar-Ridha in Medina, Imam Ar-Ridha is now the heir apparent and ruling and the crown prince in Marv, in the likes of Mashhad. And when he's there, eventually, when this same Junaidi comes and he starts giving political punishments to prisoners who were favorable to the other side of the family, and now he's punishing them, eventually when he sees him, Imam whispers something to the Khalifa. When he whispers something to the Khalifa, Junaidi sees him whisper. And he says, I beg of you, do whatever you want to do, but do not listen to what he says. Because he thought he was looking at him from his own lens. We sometimes mirror people, right? We mirror people. Mirror people meaning what? We are afraid of what people will do to us because we know what we would do to other people. And oftentimes, that reflection is not very good. And so, one of the things that comes forward is if you look at worlds and this idea, you'll find that we are often afraid of extraterrestrials, oftentimes, because it may be that internally we are afraid of what we would do to others, and we know what we would do to others. For example, every time a technologically superior civilization has gone to a technologically inferior civilization, they've always caused destruction in our world. I'm talking about in our world. I'm not even talking about outer space. So now, coming to this reality, Junaidi said, I beg of you, you can do whatever you want with me, just don't do what he said, Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha. Because he thought Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha was like him. And so Ma'mun says, okay, you don't want me to do what he said? I won't do what he said. Done. Fine. I'm listening to you. I'm not doing what he said. He told me to forgive you. He told me to pardon you. So I'm not going to do what he said. So he said, off with your head. The point was that he couldn't fathom, Junaidi couldn't fathom, that the Imam would be so compassionate towards him to forgive him. Remember, this is the Imam who is from the lineage of Imam Hussein who forgave Hur. So this is the second element of that. The third element of the compassion of this Imam, of reconciling these elements, is when it came to what he's known as Zamine Ahu. That is, he is known as the one who even looks after the animals. Now, from the Quranic injunction, you'll find that Sulaiman was able to talk to the animals. Solomon had the ability to speak to the creations of Allah. Whether it was the bees or the birds, or it was for ants or things of that nature, he had the ability to do that. So why not this individual? By the way, do you know today, we are making some progress on communication with other animals, especially with AI, but otherwise. It may not be very far, maybe a decade, maybe two, who knows, where we are actually able to communicate with animals in more nuance. Today, we are already able to somewhat communicate in some capacity with certain types of chimpanzees, certain types of dogs, certain types of birds, such as the gray African parrot, especially because it's able to mimic. We are able to understand certain elements. We're not fully there. Dolphins are another example. So to be able to communicate with animals should not be so far-fetched in our domain, number one. Number two, there's a moment where a man is hunting. When he's hunting, eventually he is about to hunt a deer. And when he's about to hunt this deer and slaughter the deer, he eventually comes a moment and time where the Imam is in the vicinity. When the Imam is in the vicinity, this deer comes to the Imam and begins to converse. When the deer begins to converse with the Imam, eventually the Imam says to the man, I'm asking you to leave this deer alone on the basis that this is a mother deer and she has gone out to seek food and feed her children. She is asking that you allow her a respite to just be able to go and feed milk to her children, and then she gives her word that she will return to you. Now this person was spellbound, because these are things that you hear about, you don't see. And us living in the material world, for us it's very difficult to fathom these things, but believe me, they still happen. Nonetheless, the spellbound hunter said, okay. So the deer went on its way, and eventually, after some time, as promised, the deer returned. And when the deer returned, this individual, who was the hunter, was absolutely flabbergasted and spellbound. And he said, how can I slaughter, or how can I kill or hunt the same creation who literally gave its word, came back? Sometimes animals are better than human beings, by the way. And so this reality comes forward, and this animal kept its word. He said, I'm forgiving it, pardoning it, it can go on its way. The principle from this story, we're told that Imam is also known as Zamine Ahu. And we write Imam Zamin, for example, on the movement when we travel, oftentimes it's on this basis. So why am I saying this? When we talked last night about Rahmatul lil Alameen, that Rahmah continues in the form of Imam Ar-Ridha, who cuts across this divide of humans and even animals, and that shows that animals should be getting the mercy that human beings should be giving and considerate of them in that regard. The next element is also, this Imam cuts across the Shia-Sunni divide. Meaning, there's a few Imams, Imam Ali alayhi salam, of course, Imam Hussein, but also and especially Imam al-Sadiq and Imam Ar-Ridha. These three personalities are highly revered amongst the Muslim community, in particular the Sufi community. That is, the Sufi community would say that these personalities, they actually lock and they actually encapsulate the essence of Islamic spirituality. So there's a huge bridge that we also need to commemorate in that as well. The next element, because remember, Iran was predominantly Sunni. Iran only predominantly became Shia in the last 400 years under the Safavid dynasty. Bukhari, Muslim, Tirmidhi, all these people were Ahl Sunnah scholars who were from Persian descent. So the Imam came to an environment where the people there are not predominantly Shia. And in that environment, in that era, the Imam is showing the dynamics. Now comes another element of the Imams. Why is he known as Ali Muhammad? As we're drawing to a conclusion. He's known as this because the scholars say that although there are scholars amongst all of them are scholars, the element is the ability to express the knowledge on a global stage is what happened during the time of Imam Ar-Ridha. What does that mean? It means that this is the era and time where there's two major empires. There's the Abbasids and the Muslim Empire, and this is the onset of the golden age of Islam, as they call it, where the world is getting algebra, mathematics, chemistry, alchemy, many things. But on the other side, in Europe, is a man by the name of Charlemagne. Charlemagne is considered the one who united, they call him the father of Europe. And he's the one who united Europe to become what eventually became modern Europe. He's the one who implemented the system of, for example, counts. You know, we have counties today. He had counties, and he had a count who was the head of a county, and he was the head of the Francos at that time, the Franks. And so he was given a water clock by Harun al-Abbasi. He sent as a gift. Both of them, the Charlemagne and the Abbasids, they had a mutual interest in the Iberian Peninsula and the Iberian coast. And so they tried to make good arrangements between each other to establish diplomatic ties, like you're seeing in the world today. For example, I'm hearing today that Turkey wants to be part of the BRICS, for example. So diplomatic ties are being established in our world. Same too was going on then. Charlemagne said, he looked at this water clock that was sent by the Arabs and the Persians. He said, is this sorcery? Is this magic? What on earth is this? A clock that's powered by water? It was unfathomable at that time for him. So in this era where there is a spreading of culture, language, intellect, at the same time, there was another dynamic of injustice and political treachery. So one of the questions that people ask is, how is it that Imam Ar-Ridha became the heir apparent? Heir apparent meaning that if something happens to the Khalifa who's in power at the time, then he'll take over the reins. How? And so even one of the Shias asked this question to the Imam during his time. You know, we sometimes say, oh, we should be completely aloof from politics. Hold on. So someone said, Imam, how are you under a tyrannical regime? Number one, first of all, the Imam was forced. He didn't have an option, right? It's very clear about that, right? Number two, he said, have you read the Quran? He said, yes. He said, have you heard the story of Yusuf? He said, yes. He said, what happened in the story of Yusuf? He said, what happens at the end? He said, Yusuf becomes finance minister of Egypt. Yeah. Was the ruler Muslim? He said, no. Was he compassionate, loving, caring necessarily? No. So you don't have a problem with Yusuf. Why do you have a problem with me? Number one. Number two, there are Imams during his father's time. There was the example of Ali bin Yaqtin, you'll remember, right? Who was someone, the Imam, who said to the Imam al-Kadhim, that look, I have this opportunity to be in political office. And the Imam said, if you can do good for the community and you can do betterment for the community, take the position. But the Imam also checked him at times. And the Imams would check their representatives. So it's important to keep these things in mind. That's a political guidance for us today. Some people may say, and this is different from person to person, you know yourself, I know myself, I may know, somebody may know in their heart, I'm not cut out to be in this because I will seep into the treachery of politics. There are people like that. They'll just blend in and they'll become more holier than the Pope, as the saying goes. And they'll become bigger lobbyists than the lobbyists and they'll reinvent the field. But there's other people who may not do that. And that's where there's complexity here. But there is another complexity that the scholars say, and that is the fact of the matter that this was an Imam who's Ma'soom appointing an individual there. And there's a difference there, that they know the capability of that individual. So now, coming to this Imam, in this dynamic, he also shows a path of politics and a path of serving people while in a state of oppression and also being in a political office where it's symbolic. So the Imam would, for example, if there were believers, he would use the wealth that he had to help the believers, either through loan or through charity or something to help them establish themselves. So if there's an opportunity to control your moral compass and still at the same time help society for the betterment, there is some room for that. Within the context of Islam, within the context of what the Ahlul Bayt teach. All of the Imams did not go to the battlefield like Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein alayhi salam went, but Imam Hassan didn't. Imam Sajjad didn't. Remember, the circumstances were different. During Imam Hassan's time, it was different. He didn't have supporters to fight with him. During the time of Imam Sajjad, if he would say Qala Rasulullah, people would either ignore him or make fun of him. During the time of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq, they used the institutions of the universities of Medina. Today, universities have been corrupted. You know that? Universities have political pressure on them. It's no wonder that if you read the likes of Nassim Nicholas Taleb and others, they said the foremost thinkers of the last 200 years, all of them came from outside of academia. Who? The likes of Darwin. Darwin was an amateur biologist. He was not a professor or anything of that nature. The likes of Marx, Karl Marx, he was considered by society, he was not affiliated with the universities explicitly. Afterwards he was studied. Einstein, although Einstein later got affiliated with Princeton, if you recall, he gave his dissertation, which gave his PhD, which eventually became the theory of relativity, while he was a patent clerk in Germany. He was not even part of any university at the time. And of course, Freud. He says these four people, they were outside institutions. Today, even, institutions are losing their integrity when they're not able to speak the truth, when they're not able to speak what is reality. When presidents are being kicked out for speaking the truth or allowing the truth to be spoken, what society are we living in? So you'll find the society there and the society here are not that different. Things have not changed. As the old saying goes, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I'm leaving everything, but just let's cut to this point about Imam Ar-Ridha. Imam Ar-Ridha is a deeply spiritual personality that if you and I connect our lives with, their spiritual treasures are astronomical. In terms of, remember, Allah made certain individuals a wasila to reach Him. When you're in your difficult time, have a connection to this Imam to help you. Whether it was an elderly lady, it happened in the shrine of Imam Ar-Ridha, that remember all ibadah is to Allah. But there was a famous reciter who came to the shrine of Imam Ar-Ridha where he would often, and eventually he would give his offering and he would give some wealth and charity at the shrine of Imam Ar-Ridha. One day he says that I was giving the wealth that I had towards the shrine, and eventually I was leaving. As I was leaving, I bumped accidentally. You know, there's big crowds. He says I accidentally bumped an elderly lady. When I bumped this elderly lady, I felt really bad. When I felt really bad about it, he says, I thought to myself, should I not at least recompense her? She didn't ask for anything, but at least the least I can do as a decent human being is to try to apologize and try to give her something as a recompensation for this, a recompense. And he says that I thought that I will go to the khuddams, they know me very well, and I'll tell them, can you please give me this money that I've brought with me today, and I will give it to somebody else today, and next time I'll bring you back that and more for next week, inshallah. So he did. He went back and he said, Khuddam, do you give me the permission to please do this? They said, very well, we know you very well. Your word is gold to us. So he went and he gave this wealth and he said, Salaamu alaykum wa alaykum as-salam. Dear lady, I'm sorry, I bumped you. I felt really bad. I wanted to give you a gift as a recompense for this trouble that I offered you. He said, this is just some money. Just 20, at that time when it was worth something, 20,000 Oman. He said, what? He said, 20,000 Oman. He said, what? He said, like, I bumped you, I'm sorry, I apologize, I didn't mean it, I didn't mean to hurt you or harm you, and I'm giving it. She started crying. He said, what happened, what happened? She said, I'm not crying because my dua has been accepted. So what do you mean? She said, I'm crying because of the exact extent to which it's been accepted. Meaning what? He said, I came here because my child is getting married, and I needed some income to be able to be arranged so that I could have this marriage be done. But the exact amount that I wanted or needed was 20,000. I didn't realize how much the imams care for us in that environment. You know, there's one man, during the time of the same imam, he was a barber. He wasn't physically able, he was elderly, he wasn't able to go see the imam. You know, when the imam came to Nishapur, people went to him, visit him, they wanted to see him. So he just had the wish to see the imam. And he said, I just beg if someone can relate to the imam that I can see him. The imam came to visit him personally. He was a barber. He said, I can't offer you anything, O Ibn Rasulullah, but can I please offer you maybe a haircut or something? So he actually offered the imam a haircut. And the imam took it. And at that notion, they say the imam, at the end of the conclusion, that he gestured for it, and he touched the blade on the dull end, and it became gold. When this happened, this is truly free person. He said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, you know, you and I would probably be quiet and be like, I'll take it.
He said, I didn't do this for wealth. He said, I don't want this. He said, what do you want? He said, I just want that at the end of my life, when I'm in the state of naza, when I'm about to leave this world, that you come to my aid and assistance. He said, done. And narration said that he was later the Imam came to him when he, as promised, in that state. That Imam can perhaps help you and I to get closer to Allah. Nonetheless, we leave everything and we turn our hearts and our minds to the masa'ib and the tragedy of this Imam. This is the same Imam who had to leave his family. And when he was leaving his family, he had to mourn. He asked his family mourned over him because they knew he would not come back to Medina. He was leaving towards Tus, he was leaving towards Marv, he was leaving towards Mashhad, and he would not return. Eventually, he got there, and eventually the rulers found that there was such a love, there was such a conviction amongst the people about this Imam Ar-Ridha. They said he's a political threat. They poisoned the Imam. They filled grapes with poison. They offered it to the Imam, forced him to eat. He took them. Eventually, the blood began to seep into the body of the Imam, and the blood and the poison was beginning to affect the Imam to the point that he was about to depart from this world. This is the same Imam who did tremendous things to establish the aza of his grandfather, Sayyid al-Shuhada. That he would say to Rayyan ibn Shabib, he said, Ibn Shabib, Rayyan ibn Shabib, no, in kunta baqiyan li shay'in fabki lil Husayn. Oh Rayyan, if you ever want to cry for a thing, if you ever want to cry for anyone, then cry for Husayn. Why? Because he was butchered like the animals are butchered. He was slaughtered like the flocks are slaughtered, like the sheep are slaughtered, like the animals are slaughtered. He would always patronize those people who were the ones who recited poetry in honor of the Imam, to the extent that he called on Da'bal al-Khizai, the one who would recite Marsiya, the poet. He would sit, the Imam would say, Da'bal, recite poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt, and he would begin and he would say, how sad is the tragedy of the Ahlul Bayt. Someone is buried in Medina, and someone is buried in Kufa, and someone is buried in the likes of Medina again, and someone is in Karbala. And he continues up to Baghdad, and eventually he says, the Imam says, oh Da'bal, add 2 lines to this. He says, what shall I write, Yabna Rasulullah? He says, and someone is buried in Tus. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, who is this who is buried in Tus? I'm not aware. He says, this is me who will be buried in Tus, that I will not be able to return home. I will be buried in this land. Ajrukum ala Allah. When this was said, eventually a cry was heard. There was a partition. They say that there was a cry that was heard. That cry that was heard. They said, stop the majlis. They said, why? They said, because on hearing this line that someone is buried in Tus, and this is to be Imam Ar-Ridha, the sister of Imam Ar-Ridha has fell unconscious, and she is out of conscious. Stop the majlis. Ajrukum ala Allah. Azadaro do jumle. Ye bahan thi Imam Raza ki, जिन्होंने सुना और बस सुना ये शेर कि कोई तूस में दफन है, मगर सलाम हो उस ज़ैनब उलिया मकाम पर जिसने न सिर्फ सुना पर बल्कि आंखों से देखा। 70 कदम दूर भाई था, खंजर शिमर लाइन था, ज़ैनब खड़ी देख रही थी, तिलाए ज़ैनबिया था। ज़ैनब ने कहा, ऐ पिसरे साद, मेरा माजाया ज़िबा हो रहा है, तू खड़ा देख रहा है। ज़ैनब के दिल में क्या गुजर गई। على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Ya Allah, accept this ibadah. Ya Allah, allow us to learn from the right life of Imam Ridha. Allow us to make wise, prudent decisions in light of Imam Ridha. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Zaman and allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. A final request of you, could please recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for your marhameen, for our marhameen, for all those who do not have someone to recite a Fatiha for them in this night, for the marhameen of those who make these programs possible, and especially for the dearly departed soul of Ayatollah Fadil Milani, a great scholar who I had the ability to benefit from, and many others. Please keep him in your Fatiha and your du'as tonight. Rahmallah. من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات. اللهم صل على بسم الله. حسين حسين
یا حسین یا حسین. مرنے کی تمہاری یہ کیسی خبر آئی ہے، دل ٹکڑے ہو گیا ہے بھیا میرے پردیسی. یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی، یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی. یہ کیسی خبر پائی بھیا میرے پردیسی. خوش نکلے تھے وطن سے پھر آئے نہ وطن میں، خوش نکلے تھے وطن سے پھر آئے نہ وطن میں. کیسا سفر ہوا ہے بھیا میرے پردیسی. یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی، یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی. یہ کیسی خبر پائی بھیا میرے پردیسی. مہمانی کے ہلے سے بلوایا تھا ظالم نے، مہمانی کے ہلے سے بلوایا تھا ظالم نے. مارا تمہیں دگا سے بھیا میرے پردیسی. یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی، یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی. یہ کیسی خبر پائی بھیا میرے پردیسی. یہ کیسا ستم ٹوٹا گر فاطمہ کا لوٹا، یہ کیسا ستم ٹوٹا گر فاطمہ کا لوٹا. خالی ہوا مدینہ بھیا میرے پردیسی. یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی، یوں فاطمہ کہتی تھی بھیا میرے پردیسی. یہ کیسی خبر پائی بھیا میرے پردیسی. یا حسین بے وطن آئے حسین بے کفن، یا حسین بے وطن آئے حسین بے کفن. لازم نہ تھا یہ چرک ستم گر کے واسطے، آب فرات شام کے لشکر کے واسطے. یاروں کی یال بے کسی شہ کرو ذرا، وہ دھوپ دوپہر کی وہ صحرائے کربلا. یا حسین بے وطن آئے حسین بے کفن، یا حسین بے وطن آئے حسین بے کفن. وہ کاک دشت کے وہ گرمی ہوا، اس دھوپ میں کھڑا ہے سلیمان کربلا. زہرا پکارتی ہے کہ فریاد یا خدا، میرا حسین دھوپ کے اندر ہے جل رہا. یا حسین بے وطن آئے حسین بے کفن، یا حسین بے وطن آئے حسین بے کفن. مظلوم کہہ رہا تھا کہ میں پیاسا پیاسا ہوں، اے شمر تجھ میں مانگتا پانی ذرا سا ہوں. صدمہ ہے دل پہ پیاس سے حالت تباہ ہے، وہ بولا تم کو پانی پلانا گناہ ہے. یا حسين أبي وطن آي حسين أبي كفن يا حسين أبي وطن آي حسين أبي كفن. سورة الفاتحة.
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله آخر عهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا غريب الغرباء السلطان أبا الحسن مولانا علي بن موسى الرضا كن شفيعنا شفيع والدينا في يوم الجزاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولاي يا صاحب أسر الزمان الأمان الأمان الأمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كعبة الإيمان. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك